Nietzsche claimed that love isn't tenderness, but struggle, not understanding but a war of forces. For him, man and woman don't meet in transparency, but in mystery. Man seeks clarity, dominance, and direct answers. Woman offers dissimulation, irony, and silence. This abyss isn't accidental but essential. It's as if Nietzsche already knew that the question, "Why don't men understand women?" is doomed from the start, because understanding in this terrain is always a form of wanting to control. What if the true masculine error was precisely believing he can decipher woman? What if the feminine isn't meant to be understood, but lived as an enigma, as a force that challenges logic? Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to tear away our illusions. He shows us that perhaps the impossibility of comprehension is actually the key to seeing beyond the masks of love. Nietzsche had a disconcerting view of woman. While many philosophers of his era sought to describe her in moral terms or as a simple appendage to masculine life, he treated her as an enigma in herself. Woman, he said, isn't transparent, isn't a creature that lets herself be captured by logic or direct reason. For Nietzsche, she harbors an art of dissimulating, of creating veils and masks, of never surrendering completely. And it's precisely this slippery nature that both fascinates and torments men. Man, accustomed to wanting to dominate and understand the world through clarity, through reasoning, through analysis, encounters the feminine as a force that escapes. It's like trying to hold water between fingers. The more force applied, the more rapidly it slips away. Nietzsche saw in this not a defect but a virtue. Woman preserves her mystery not from weakness, but because she knows instinctively that her power lies in not being deciphered. Many men, however, confuse this mystery with falsehood. They try to extract from woman a definitive truth, an absolute yes, an ultimate confession. But the feminine, for Nietzsche, doesn't let itself be imprisoned in these categories. He wrote that woman is an artist in the art of appearance, creator of illusion, enchantress of the masculine gaze. It's not about deception, but vital strategy. It's in the capacity to veil what's intimate that her strength resides. Man who seeks to understand woman like one who seeks to solve an equation with a final result condemns himself to frustration. And here emerges Nietzsche's provocation. Why do we want so much to reduce the other to something that fits our schemes? The masculine desire to understand woman reveals more about man than about her. It's a desire for control, for possession, to remove freedom from mystery. Woman then becomes this battlefield where man tries to impose his logic, and she resists with silence, play, irony. Nietzsche saw this as part of life's dance. For him, there's no solution to the feminine enigma, because the enigma itself is what keeps it alive. The fascination of the relationship between man and woman isn't in supposed transparency, but precisely in the play of light and shadow, in what isn't said, in what remains hidden. Man wants to open all doors, but woman knows that if all were opened, desire would die. In our daily lives, how many love conflicts don't spring from this desperate search to understand the other? Man who repeatedly asks what woman thinks, what she feels, what she wants, expecting a clear and definitive answer, forgets that feelings aren't fixed objects. They're flows, movements, and often contradictory. Woman responds today one way, tomorrow another, not because she lies, but because the human being is multiple, is constant change. Nietzsche would remind us, contradiction isn't failure, it's part of life. That's why, instead of trying to capture the feminine in rigid formulas, Nietzsche invites us to accept it as aesthetic force. Mystery shouldn't be eliminated but celebrated. It's in difference in what escapes that the power of encounter resides. Man who insists on understanding closes himself. He who learns to bear mystery opens himself to a deeper game where there's no possession but dance. Nietzsche didn't say this as one who praises or condemns woman, but as one who reveals a hard truth. The relationship between sexes is permanent tension. The error lies in wanting this tension to disappear. And perhaps it's here that the lesson begins. Men will never understand women, because what's alive isn't understood, it's lived. The enigma doesn't ask for solution, it asks for courage to bear it. When Nietzsche speaks of love, he never describes it as a space of tenderness or equality. For him, love is a battlefield, an arena where forces clash disguised as affection. What we call romance or passion often isn't, in his view, more than a silent struggle for power. It's hard to admit, but when we love, we don't only love the other. We also love the dominion we seek to exercise over them. Man generally desires woman like one who desires a possession. He doesn't only want to share her life, he wants her to become an extension of himself. Love in this sense is less surrender and more appropriation. Nietzsche suggests that when man says, "I love you," he's often saying deep down, "I want you to be mine, to belong to my world, to my rules, to my gaze." It's a love that seeks to imprison. Woman, on the other hand, according to Nietzsche, plays differently. She doesn't seek direct possession, but influences, conducts, seduces, attracts. Her strength isn't in dominating by imposition, but in weaving invisible threads that make man move in her direction. It's an indirect form of power, more subtle and perhaps even more effective. Man thinks he chooses, often he's chosen. Man believes he conquers, often he's conquered. Nietzsche saw in the feminine this capacity to manipulate the invisible field of desire, not as moral judgment, but as fact of life. If man is brute force, woman is strategy. If he wants possession, she wants influence. If he seeks to dominate from outside, she molds from within. Thus, love becomes a game of forces where neither side is innocent, but where movements are different. And here's the reason why so many men feel they don't understand women, because they still seek to apply to love the logic of clarity, linearity, explicit domination. They want direct answers, clear commitments, absolute truths. And the feminine responds with silence, with mood changes, with answers that seem contradictions. Man gets irritated because he thinks there's lying, but Nietzsche would remind us that love isn't a place of fixed truths. It's a stage of strategies, masks, and games. In daily life we see this evidently. Man who demands from his companion a rational explanation for each gesture or feeling feels betrayed when she changes her mind, when she says yes today and no tomorrow. He believes this is incoherence, but Nietzsche would say it's not incoherence, it's life. The feminine for him is flow, is metamorphosis. Trying to capture it in formulas is like trying to bottle wind. This conflict shows that love isn't only affection, but also struggle for power. With each declaration, each gesture, there exists a silent dispute for space, for who yields and who leads. Man believes that by offering protection and stability, he gains fidelity. Woman, in turn, may accept this protection but doesn't surrender without keeping secret something that guarantees her freedom. Nietzsche said that woman always guards a part of herself inaccessible because it's precisely there that her strength resides. But it's important to perceive that Nietzsche doesn't reduce woman to a caricature of manipulation. What he points out is the inevitable asymmetry in the love game. Love isn't a transparent contract, but a war disguised as union. When man believes he's conquered woman completely, when he thinks he possesses her entirely, it's at this exact moment that he's already deceived. There's always a remainder, an excess, something that escapes dominion. And isn't it precisely this that keeps desire alive? If woman were completely possessed, completely deciphered, completely transparent, there would be no more mystery, and without mystery, love would die. Nietzsche saw clearly that what feeds passion isn't full satisfaction, but its impossibility. Desire springs from lack, from what never surrenders entirely. How many relationships don't destroy themselves precisely because one tries to control the other in love's name? Man demands that woman reveal everything, be clear, abandon her secrets. Woman demands that man be faithful to the ideal she projected on him. Both suffer because both seek an impossible. Love without struggle, love without power, love without masks. For Nietzsche, this search is naive. Love is always battle, always conflict, always game, and the error lies in wanting it to be only peace. Men will never understand women because they confuse love with harmony, when actually love is war disguised as tenderness. Accepting this may seem bitter, but it's liberating. If we understand that love is also power, we can stop demanding from the other what they can never give: absolute transparency. Love isn't total comprehension, it's a dance of forces. It's not complete surrender, but creative tension. Nietzsche invites us to look at love without illusions, to accept that what unites us also puts us in struggle. And perhaps in this paradox lies its beauty. To love isn't to win, it's to bear the game. Man doesn't understand woman because, in his eagerness for clarity, he forgets that feminine power lies precisely in remaining enigmatic. And what is love, if not this mixture of fascination and frustration, where incomprehension is an essential part of desire? Nietzsche said that woman isn't only man's companion, but also his mirror. Not a smooth and passive mirror, but a deforming mirror that returns to man his own vanity, his insecurities, and his hidden desires. Man, looking at woman, doesn't see her as she is, but as projection of himself. He sees in her confirmation of his value, his strength, his masculinity, but at the same time, he discovers in her a silent resistance, a reflection that strips him naked. That's why so many men anguish before women, not because they're incomprehensible in themselves, but because they reveal to man what he can't bear in himself. When man desires to be admired, he seeks in the feminine gaze the brilliance that confirms his greatness. When he desires to be validated, he looks in woman for the answer that reaffirms his importance. But woman, being mirror, returns something more complex. She returns irony, returns distance, returns contradiction. Nietzsche saw clearly that woman knows masculine fragility and uses it, often unconsciously, as an instrument of power. Man needs to be recognized, needs to be seen. Woman perceives this and plays with this desire, sometimes offering admiration, sometimes withdrawing it. In this movement, man feels lost, sometimes exalted, sometimes humiliated. But what really torments him isn't woman, but the fact of depending so much on the reflection she returns to him. Let's think of everyday situations. How many men get irritated when they don't receive from their partner the expected recognition? He dresses up, conquers, works, seeks to be successful, and expects her to be enchanted. But woman sometimes reacts with indifference or criticism. For Nietzsche, there's no surprise in this. Woman isn't there only to sustain the masculine ego. She's her own force, not a mere instrument. And when she resists this role of constant validation, man finds himself before his own insufficiency. It's here that resentment is born. Man, incapable of bearing the reflection that doesn't correspond to the ideal he built of himself, accuses woman of being incomprehensible, cold, contradictory. But the truth is, she only reflects the emptiness he carries and doesn't want to face. Nietzsche would say that incomprehension isn't in woman, but in man's fragility, who can't bear seeing himself without masks. At the same time, the feminine doesn't limit itself to being passive mirror. It creates reflections. Woman, according to Nietzsche, is an artist of appearance, and this means she constructs images to return to man. Sometimes she exalts him, sometimes she diminishes him. This oscillation isn't chance, but part of life's game. Just as the actor creates characters, woman creates images that man takes as truth. He believes she loves him absolutely or despises him completely, but doesn't perceive he's before a vital dramaturgy. It's hard to accept this, but it's liberating. Man who understands this movement can perceive that his eagerness to be understood is, deep down, an eagerness to be confirmed. He doesn't seek to understand woman. He seeks that she understand and validate him. He wants her to be a perfect mirror of his greatness. But Nietzsche shows us that this mirror is always cloudy, always ironic. This tension is evident in many relationships. Man who demands absolute fidelity, who seeks eternal certainties, who wants from woman an unconditional yes, ends up harvesting frustration. Because woman, even when she loves, keeps distance, keeps silence, keeps something that belongs to no one. The mirror never reflects what one desires completely. There's always an excess, a residue, something that escapes. Nietzsche didn't see this as a problem to be solved, but as a fundamental condition of life. Man needs woman as mirror precisely because it's in her that he discovers himself. By trying to decipher her, he doesn't perceive he's looking at himself. And what he calls feminine incomprehension is often his own incomprehension of himself. Deep down, man fears what he sees in the reflection. He fears his fragility, fears his exposed vanity, fears his dependence on the feminine gaze. And woman, conscious or not, reminds him of this with every gesture. The ironic smile, calculated silence, mood change, all this isn't only caprice, but the mark that the mirror doesn't return fixed images. It moves, alters, and forces man to confront his instability. Thus, the feminine enigma is also man's own enigma. Not understanding woman is, ultimately, not understanding himself. The mirror returns uncomfortable truths, and that's why so many men prefer to accuse women of mystery instead of facing their own vulnerability. Nietzsche dismantles romantic illusion by showing that love is this game of reflections, where each projects and receives back something unexpected. Perhaps true wisdom lies in accepting this game without demanding total transparency. To love isn't to possess a faithful reflection, but to learn to live with images that change, that surprise, that challenge. Woman, as mirror, isn't a problem to be solved, but an invitation to a deeper look at oneself. And perhaps men will never understand women because they can't bear seeing in the reflection what scares them most, their own fragility. Nietzsche had aversion to what he called moral illusions. For him, the greatest human sufferings didn't come from reality, but from the idealizations we create. And when the subject was love, he pointed out that men's fundamental error lay in idealizing women. It's not about loving them as they are, but transforming them into angels, goddesses, unattainable muses. The feminine thus ceases to be life to become fantasy. And every fantasy, when broken, produces resentment. For Nietzsche, the idealized woman is masculine invention. Man doesn't relate to the concrete woman before him, but to the image he constructed in his imagination. It's as if he projected onto her all the virtues he desires to find: purity, absolute fidelity, infinite goodness, permanent sweetness. But life doesn't work like this. No one can correspond to such a rigid ideal. Sooner or later, reality breaks the mask. Let's think of common examples. Man who believes he's found the perfect woman is disappointed upon discovering she also feels anger, jealousy, vanity, ambition. The young man in love who sees his beloved as an angel can't bear when he perceives she can also be selfish or indifferent. The husband who expects total devotion gets furious when he encounters autonomy and desire for freedom. The problem isn't in woman, but in the unreal projection man placed on her. Nietzsche warned that this idealization is a form of subtle violence. For by idealizing, man doesn't truly love woman. He only loves his own invention. He demands she correspond to the myth he created, and when she fails to be this myth, he accuses her of deceiving. But deep down, who deceived himself was he? Incomprehension in this case springs not from woman, but from man's incapacity to see beyond his illusions. And why do men idealize? Nietzsche would say it's from cowardice before life. To idealize is to escape reality, to try to find perfection where only flow, change, and contradiction exist. Man, insecure, fears existence is chaos and seeks refuge in a pure and fixed image of woman. She becomes idle, and like every idol, inevitably falls. The danger of idealization is that it transforms love into prison. The idealized woman can't err, can't change, can't show herself human. She needs to be perfect to sustain masculine fantasy. And when she dares show her complexity, her ambiguity, her freedom, man becomes disappointed or rejects her. How often do we hear stories of men who, over time, say the woman changed? But did she change, or did she simply let fall the mask that was never hers, but always of the masculine gaze? Nietzsche saw in this process a kind of inevitable resentment. Resentful man accuses woman of betraying his ideal, when actually the ideal was a lie from the beginning. He wanted a goddess, but found a human being. He wanted untouchable purity, but found desire, passion, instinct. Resentment is the rage of perceiving that life doesn't correspond to fantasies. Woman, in turn, can become prisoner of this idealization. Often, to be loved, she finds herself obliged to sustain the image created by man. She needs to smile when she doesn't want to, be docile when she desires to be firm, appear pure when she feels intense desires. This silent violence destroys her interior freedom. Nietzsche denounced this as one of love's great traps. Man doesn't love the real woman, but the role she plays in his theater. The rupture of this ideal is usually painful, but also necessary, because only when the myth falls can true love be born. Real love doesn't feed on illusions, but on acceptance of imperfection. For Nietzsche, to truly love would be to bear difference, live with mystery, accept that the other will never correspond entirely to what we project on them. However, few are willing to this exercise. It's more comfortable to live from the illusion of the ideal woman than to face the abyss of the real woman. It's easier to believe in angelic purity than to deal with human contradictions. And that's why so many men never understand women, because they don't want to see them as they are, but only as they would like them to be. Nietzsche provokes us to destroy this ideal, not to devalue woman, but to free her from the prison of myth. He said we need to learn to love without illusions, to look at the other without demanding perfection. Love thus ceases to be prison and becomes space of creation. The danger of idealization, therefore, isn't only in the frustration it generates, but also in the blindness it produces. Man who idealizes doesn't see woman, he sees only his projected reflection. And while living this way, he can never understand her. To love, for Nietzsche, is to bear imperfection, to accept mystery, to live with what will never be fully explained. Man who insists on idealizing woman condemns himself to live in eternal disenchantment. But he who destroys the myth and faces reality can perhaps experience deeper love. Not love of a non-existent goddess, but love of a living human being, full of contradictions, exactly like himself. Nietzsche always insisted that life is made of forces in tension, never of peaceful equilibrium. And when he looked at the relationship between men and women, he saw exactly this, a field where desire and resentment intertwine like invisible currents. To love is to desire, but also to resent. It's to attract and repel at the same time. Love, in his vision, was never a story of harmony but of conflict. Desire brings together. Man seeks woman, fascinated by mystery, seduced by the promise of completeness. Woman, in turn, perceives this search and welcomes it, but without surrendering totally, always maintaining a space of distance that feeds the game. This movement creates attraction, but also frustration. For man, by desiring to possess fully, encounters something that never lets itself be possessed entirely, and it's at this point that resentment is born. Nietzsche understood that resentment is the child of impotence. When we can't obtain what we want, we begin to transform this frustrated desire into disguised rage. Man, before the impossibility of deciphering or controlling woman, tends to accuse her of deceiving, manipulating, hiding. He becomes resentful because he expected transparency, absolute fidelity, total surrender, and finds contradiction, silence, resistance. But resentment isn't only masculine. Woman also resents the masculine attempt at domination. When she perceives she's treated as object of possession, when she's suffocated by the demand for clarity or reduced to the role of angelic ideal, she reacts with distance, with coldness, sometimes with contempt. This feminine resentment feeds on the weight of unreal expectations placed upon her. The result is an endless cycle, desire that brings together, resentment that pushes away, and again, desire that returns. In daily life, this conflict manifests in small gestures. Man who insists on knowing "what are you thinking" gets frustrated with the evasive or ironic response. Woman, pressured to always be comprehensible, responds with silence or with cutting humor. He feels deceived. She feels suffocated. Both, deep down, desire but can't live desire without resentment's shadow. Nietzsche saw in this cycle a kind of inevitable tragedy. For to desire is always to seek something we don't have, and love never gives what it promises. There's always a lack, always an unspoken, always something that escapes. Resentment arises precisely because love, promising completeness, delivers only fragments. Man desires woman's totality. Woman desires recognition without prison. Neither gets exactly what they expect, and that's why love is so intense and so painful. He said women know this game better than men. While man still seeks clarity and possession, woman knows desire only survives in mystery. Therefore, often she consciously feeds this distance, creating in man the sensation of incompleteness, not from cruelty, but because that's how desire's dance sustains itself. Man, interpreting this as manipulation, fills with resentment when actually he's only before life's own logic. Resentment also appears as silent revenge. Man who feels rejected begins to accuse woman of being cold, calculating, selfish. Woman who feels dominated begins to ironize, diminish, deny man the recognition he seeks so much. Both wound each other, but both remain trapped in the game because desire continues. This paradox, to love and resent at the same time, is the essence of love tragedy described by Nietzsche. He saw no easy exit from this conflict. There's no formula to eliminate resentment without also eliminating desire. Love that was only peace, without tension, without friction, would cease to be love. It would be friendship, would be convenience but not passion. What we call incomprehension between men and women isn't an accidental defect, but part of the mechanism that keeps desire alive. Resentment isn't only poison, it's also fuel. Nietzsche's great provocation is to ask us, are we willing to bear this game? Man who demands total comprehension will always be disappointed. Woman who demands absolute devotion will also be disappointed. True love, for him, isn't the absence of resentment but the courage to live with it, to accept it as inseparable part of desire. In our daily life, this may seem cruel. Who wouldn't like transparent love without grievances, without frustrations? But perhaps this is just another idealization. Perhaps human love is, by nature, imperfect, full of insoluble tensions. Nietzsche invites us to abandon illusions and face this reality. To love is also to resent. The important thing is not to let resentment destroy desire, but to become part of the dance, a shadow that gives contrast to light. Thus, the eternal conflict between men and women isn't a flaw that can be corrected, but an inevitable condition of life. Desire and resentment walk together, and it's precisely this mixture that keeps love so fascinating and so painful. Man will never totally understand woman, and woman will never fully accept man's dominion. And perhaps it's in this impossibility, in this impasse, that resides the force that moves us, that torments us, and that paradoxically keeps us alive. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort. He wrote to expose wounds, to tear away masks, to destroy illusions. When we think of his vision about men and women, the first reaction may be discomfort. He doesn't offer easy solutions, doesn't deliver formulas for love happiness. On the contrary, he shows that incomprehension between sexes is inevitable, that love is a game of forces, that desire carries resentment, and that the feminine will always remain enigmatic. But it's precisely there that his strength lies. Instead of seeking to eliminate conflict, Nietzsche teaches us to live with it. Man who desires to completely understand woman deceives himself, and woman who desires to be fully understood by man also frustrates herself. The error lies in expectation. We want clarity where there's mystery, harmony where there's tension, peace where disguised war exists. Nietzsche invites us to reverse the question. Instead of asking, why can't we understand each other? He makes us ask, do we need to understand each other completely to love? This change is liberating. For if we accept that incomprehension is an essential part of relationship, we stop living in eternal frustration of not deciphering the other. We begin to see mystery not as obstacle but as fuel. The enigma ceases to be problem and becomes fascination. What keeps love alive isn't absolute transparency, but the impossibility of revealing itself entirely. It's the sensation that there's always something beyond, something to discover, something that never surrenders completely. In the everyday world, this means abandoning the illusion of possession. How many men believe that to love is to have, dominate, know everything about woman? How many women believe that to love is to transform man into perfect reflection of their ideal? These demands suffocate, kill the vitality of encounter. Nietzsche would say, we need to learn to love without wanting to reduce the other to what fits in our schemes. To love is to bear mystery, not dissolve it. This teaching is hard because it forces us to give up control. Man doesn't understand woman because he wants to control her. And woman, when she seeks to idolize man, also imprisons him in an image that doesn't correspond to reality. Both wound themselves because they want certainties in terrain that's made of movement, of metamorphosis. Nietzsche reminds us that to live is to be contradictory, and that to love is to accept this contradiction in the other. But there's something even deeper. Nietzsche shows us that this game isn't only about men and women, but about ourselves. The incomprehension we feel regarding the other is reflection of the incomprehension we have of ourselves. When we accuse the other of being enigmatic, it's because we can't bear seeing our own shadows reflected. Woman, for Nietzsche, often only returns to man what he can't bear in himself. The mirror bothers because it shows fragility, vanity, desire for power. The teaching then is double. On one hand, accept that love is conflict. On the other, use this conflict as path to self-knowledge. Instead of demanding that the other be transparent, we can ask ourselves, what does this mystery awaken in me? Why does woman's silence bother me so much? Why does man's resistance cause me frustration? Instead of fighting against incomprehension, we can learn from it. Nietzsche doesn't propose romantic love, but tragic love. A love that knows there will always be frustration, but that even so launches itself to risk. He invites us to love like one who dances on the edge of abyss, knowing there's no firm ground, but that it's precisely this instability that gives intensity to life. Love, in his vision, isn't safe harbor, but storm. And it's in storm that we discover ourselves most alive. Today, perhaps more than ever, we need this look. We live in a culture that demands certainties, quick answers, formulas for happiness. We want manuals about how to understand the other, how to build perfect relationships. But Nietzsche warns us, this is illusion. Love isn't explained, it's born. It's not resolved, it's lived. And whoever seeks perfection is condemned to disenchantment. The lesson we can take is simple and profound. Man will never totally understand woman, and woman will never totally control man. And this isn't failure, it's condition. Love is only possible because this tension exists, because we never surrender entirely, because there's always a remainder, an excess, an enigma. Accepting this is to free oneself from idealization's prison and live love more honestly, more raw, and paradoxically more truthfully. Nietzsche doesn't promise us peace in love, he promises intensity. He doesn't promise comprehension but fascination. He doesn't promise comfort but strength. And perhaps that's what we really need. Abandon the illusion that to love is to understand, and discover that to love is, above all, to have courage to live with what will never be understood. We've reached the end of this journey through Nietzsche's disconcerting view of men and women. We've seen that for him, love isn't harmony but conflict, isn't clarity but mystery. Man will never understand woman because, by trying to decipher her, he seeks to transform her into something he can control. Woman, in turn, resists, creates veils, preserves secrets, and it's precisely this impossibility of comprehension that keeps desire alive. Nietzsche showed us that the error lies in idealization, in the attempt to reduce the other to a fixed and perfect image. True love isn't born from illusion, but from acceptance of enigma. To love isn't to possess, but to bear difference. It's to have courage to dance with what doesn't reveal itself completely. And now I ask you, what belief about love has imprisoned you most until today? The illusion of possession, the search for total comprehension, or the ideal of perfection? Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Like this video if these reflections resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel to continue this philosophical journey together. Thank you for walking with me through these intense and challenging ideas.